The Gateway brings you the day's news from the St. Louis region and across Missouri. It also includes stories from the Illinois side of the river and our Metro East reporter, Will Bauer.
In Alton, in Belleville, in East St. Louis, in Edwardsville, in Cahokia Heights, at Scott Air Force Base, I'm Will Bauer, St. Louis Public Radio.
Listen to reports from Will and all of our journalists weekdays on The Gateway, on the STLPR app, and wherever you get podcasts.
State Representative Scott Fitzpatrick has moved up in the Missouri House in a short period of time, and now the Southwest Missouri native has more to say about the state's budget and a St. Louis football stadium. The Shell Knob Republican joins us next on another edition of Politically Speaking.
9, 8, 7,
6, 5, 4,
3, 2, 1.
I think that is fair to say.
Hands to kiss and babies to shake. But
I think my record speaks for itself.
That's a really good question.
Hello and welcome to the Politically Speaking podcast. I'm your host, Jason Rosenbaum, a reporter with St. Louis Public Radio. Alongside me in St. Louis is
Joe Mannies, also St. Louis Public Radio.
And joining us from beautiful Shell Knob, Missouri, our special guest today is...
I'm Scott Fitzpatrick.
A state representative from Berry County, which is in southwest Missouri. Welcome. I think you are the first Berry Countian to appear on our show. We're always a big about firsts on Politically Speaking, so we're thrilled to have you here today on the show.
Yeah, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. So I wondered if I was ever going to get the invite on the Politically Speaking podcast, so I'm glad finally I received that.
Well, I think that as soon as we got over the fact that we were going to do this by phone, you were a shoo-in because you've quickly become, I think, a fairly influential member of the Missouri House of Representatives in a relatively short amount of time. But before we heap more praise upon you and inflate your ego further, just tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of what you did before politics, and kind of just explaining how you got into elected office in the first place.
Yeah, where you grew up, so forth.
Yeah, so I grew up in Shell Knob, Missouri, and I know I've seen some people if there's an article that I'm mentioning, I see in the comments section every once in a while there's a Shell Knob, Missouri series. People like to take digs at the name of the town I'm from, but
do you know what the name is based on? I mean, are there really knobs that are made out of shells, or is it more because of where it is?
I should know this. I think like one of the early settlers, there was like a hill that for whatever reason was named Shell. I don't know. I wish I could tell you more. I should have studied up.
It was named after Cornelius Shell Knob. Who discovered the town on a venture to try and poach buffalo? I'm making this up. I'm not even gonna.
Yeah, there's no buffalo around Lake Taneycomo, I can tell you.
Not anymore. But continue.
So Shell Knob is where I grew up. There's not a high school in Shell Knob, so I went to Cassville for my schooling from K through 12, and I graduated from there in 2006. And went to Mizzou and graduated from there in 2010 with a degree in business. But before I ran for the House of Representatives, kind of while I was in the later years of high school through college and up until now, I've been in the boat dock manufacturing and construction business. And I started doing that. I lived on the lake. I grew up on the lake. Was kind of a lake bum my whole life, and enjoyed working on the water. And so I turned that into my job, and over the years we've expanded our presence from just Table Rock Lake to really doing work across the country. And so that's my other job besides being a legislator is we build marinas as our primary source of revenue. And so I double as a business person and a state legislator, and after school my business was here, and so during school I traveled back and forth a lot, and then after I graduated from college I relocated back to where I grew up.
That was going to be my question, like how did you run what I would imagine is a pretty sophisticated business while you were in college? That seems like something that not everybody does every day.
When I went to college, there were about 6 or 7 people that worked here, and we basically outsourced a lot of our manufacturing and things like that. And I had one guy that was in the sales aspect of the business that was traveling and doing a little bit of the sales, and basically another guy that we would basically go. He ran a crew that would go out and we would assemble the docks and do the repair work, and so it was kind of a small outfit at the beginning. And then after, I was back here during the summers, and so after that first year I was in college, we decided that we would be better off if we were manufacturing a lot of our own components. So I was renting out a couple of bays in a storage building to keep our tools and equipment in. Eventually, I've rented additional space in that storage building and turned it into a little manufacturing shop. And it was just a matter of having the right people. I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to hire some people that had been in this industry before, and it was just I couldn't have done it without some of the people that worked for me while I was gone. And I think anybody who's in business and who's done, who has very many employees will tell you that they are the good employees, good people to work with you, or are the backbone of any successful company. And without them, there is no business. So it was just a matter of being lucky in that regard.
So, you were pretty young when you did all this, and aren't you one of the younger legislators in Jefferson City? How old are you?
Well, I will have my, what do they call it, your golden birthday. I'll turn 28. I'll turn 28 years old on the 28th of September. So next Monday I'll have my 28th birthday. And so when I got to the House of Representatives and I was elected the first time, I think I turned 25 after the primary, and so I was 25 when I was sworn in.
Yeah.
I think there might be one other member of the House that is a few months younger than I am, but yeah, he and I are. I think it's John Carpenter. I think you've probably met him.
Yes.
Before. He's I think he's a December birthday and I'm a September birthday, but we're about the same age. So
it's going to be scary when people who are born in the 1990s start becoming legislators. I was born in 1984, first of all, so it's already like, for example, and I've said this before, when Stephen Weber was elected in 2008, he's slightly older than me. That was a sign of my impending mortality right there. But it even though I think we're we're just making note of your age, you have moved up pretty quickly in the Missouri House. You're the vice chairman of the of the House Budget Committee. Tell us a little bit kind of how you found your niche in the House and kind of what you've become known for since you were elected in 2012.
Well, when you get to when I first got elected, we went up there and started becoming familiar with what essentially what happens when a new when a new group of people get elected to the House is you go up and you meet the staff that work in the legislature, and you go through the orientation process, and you meet all the other members, and you realize in that process that that there are everybody there comes from a different walk of life. There's some people obviously that come from similar backgrounds, but people have their niche and their background. I was a relatively young person, still am, and didn't have as much life experience as a lot of the folks there. But the experience that I did have was in business and was largely related to numbers and finances and things like that. And before when I was in college, if I had some free time every once in a while, or if I got bored, I'd be on Yahoo Finance, just looking at companies' balance sheets and income statements, and looking at their just how they run their business, and always kind of found that fascinating. And so being in a position to actually have some impact on that size of an enterprise, that being the Missouri state government, I found intriguing. So I made sure that the speaker at the time, Tim Jones, knew that I was very interested in serving on the budget committee. I spent quite a bit of time with the staff and House Appropriations that staff the budget committees and the appropriations subcommittees, And I was fortunate that Speaker Jones put me on the Budget Committee. I was one of 4 freshmen, first-term members that were put on the Budget Committee from my class or from my caucus. And so I guess the kindness of Speaker Jones to put me on the committee was the first step in that path that I ended up being on. And then at that point, I really spent a lot of time with the staff and House Appropriations, just learning as much as I could about the state's budget and the process of appropriating money, the constitutional provisions, whether they be restrictions on how we use money, et cetera, that exist, so that I understood the budget and the requirements of us in that process better than a lot of people who were focusing on other niches that they were more familiar with.
So with you are the vice chairman, and typically the vice chairman most of the time has kind of a leg up to become the budget chairman after the budget chairman terms out of office. Tom Flanagan is currently the budget chairman. He's from Carthage. He terms out of the legislature after 2016, I think.
Yeah.
It had been thought that you were going to be the next budget chair. You may still be, but one of the wrinkles that has occurred is Marcia Hafner, who I think has also tried to become budget chair, has decided to run for re-election instead of the Senate. Is there going to be like a contested battle for the gavel of that committee, or is it really just going to be up to Speaker Richardson about who he ends up choosing after 2016?
Well, I think that as everybody on this phone or in this conversation is aware, that the Speaker has the final say on who chairs every committee. I think that Marcia is a very intelligent person. She's a good legislator, and she's done well on the committees that she's chaired. And I assume that the Speaker is going to look at the two of us, and maybe there are other people that are interested in that position. I don't know, but I assume that the Speaker will look at those his options and kind of weigh what the strengths and opportunities of each person who wants to do the job are, and he'll just make the decision the best that he can.
Well, in your position, I've got 2 related questions. First, have there been surprises since you've been on the committee? Is there a particular area of the budget that you're particularly focused on, and what do you see as the challenges going forward in the next few years?
Well, I spent my first 2 years, in addition to being on the Budget Committee, I was on the Appropriations Committee, which, for the people who aren't real familiar with the way the Budget Committee works, they're basically the Appropriations Committees are essentially subcommittees of the Budget Committee. So I was on one of the subcommittees as well as being on the Budget Committee that those report to. And the subcommittee that I was on was the Appropriations Committee for Transportation, Revenue, and Economic Development. And so that was the area that I became most familiar with my first 2 years in the legislature, because in the Appropriations Committees we really had the opportunity to dive into the subject matter there. I think that everybody would agree, or most people would agree, that the 2 biggest issues facing us in the state budget going forward right now are probably going to be A, the growth of Medicaid expenditures and Medicaid-related expenditures, and B, how do we continue to ensure that we can fully match federal funds in our transportation budget. And those are going to be the things that I think are going to consume a good portion of our time and efforts during this next session and the sessions going forward.
Have you gotten one of the budget-related things that occurred this week was the governor announced that he wants to increase higher education spending by about $55 million, and that'll be paired with a tuition freeze, so to speak. I'm not sure if you've delved into those news stories very much, but from my understanding, this is not the first time the governor has proposed this before the budget kind of comes out, or even before the consensus revenue comes out. Is that going to be well received by the legislature? Is it really just going to depend on what the budget numbers end up being later in the year?
Well, I think at this stage in the game, we're not even 3 months. We're not even 3 months into the current budget year, and the daily numbers for today, the daily general revenue report this morning shows that we are down about 1.3% in our collections over last year. So, if the ability of the governor to include that amount of money in his budget proposal to the legislature, and the ability of the legislature to include it in the actual budget, I think is still to be determined. I think that one issue is going to be are we going to have a supplemental budget request from the Department of Social Services for Medicaid expenditures? And I think that all the indications that I'm receiving are that we probably will. And the size of that supplemental request is going to have a direct impact on the available resources we have going into the next budget year. So, would it be nice if we had the money and we could give higher education, appropriate an additional $55 million to higher education? Yeah, that'd be great. And I think that higher education is an important thing to fund. I mean, I think having an educated workforce is one of the top economic development tools that we can have. That kind of relates back to my answer about how people are the most important thing in any business. So, I'd love to be able to fund higher education, but I think it's way too early in the fiscal year right now to be able to tell what our ability to do that is going to be.
Now, as you know, I mean, there's been this fight for several years over Medicaid expansion, and the state of Missouri has basically passed up at least $4 billion and possibly more if you're going to if you're looking at next year in federal money to pay for it. On the budget committee, I mean, is there any reconsidering? I know there was some talk last session of trying to come up with some sort of way. Now that you're going to be facing additional expenditure requests from the Department of Social Services, do you expect any sort of reconsideration, or is that sort of not on the table?
I think there's a couple of facets to this. I think one of the facets is the political facet, and that just politically, it's probably not going to be a feasible thing for any type of expansion or reform of Medicaid to occur in a I know this seems to be a recurring excuse for a lot of people, but I just don't know how far that will advance in a presidential and gubernatorial election year. I think that for me, from an operational standpoint, looking at the state of Missouri and our government, we are in the process of transitioning, and it's been an abysmal process of transitioning to a new eligibility determination system. And the wait times, I mean, people who were eligible for Medicaid or are eligible for Medicaid under the current state law are having a hard time even getting the department to effectively handle their case. If we open the floodgates to hundreds of thousands of additional people right now, I don't see how the department has the ability to even process those people. We're not getting the current workload through the system right now. And you've got in the cases of issues like pregnant women who are obviously very time-sensitive cases that those determinations have to be made. If we pour another few 100,000 people into the backlog of this thing, I think it could have some pretty drastic negative effects on the existing population. That is, in addition to the additional costs that we're going to have. It's even if it is a 90-10 match, the costs of Medicaid are just they go up faster than anything else in the state budget, and it's really one of the main it is the largest non-discretionary item that we have to fund. It doesn't matter. It's not like we can say, you guys want $10 billion, we'll give you $9 billion. Because what happens when we do that is that pharmacists don't get paid, doctors don't get paid, hospitals don't get paid, the service providers don't get paid for the work that they're doing, and it's already at their Medicaid reimbursement rates are not that impressive. So it's an issue that we're going to have to address one way or the other, and I think it's going to have to happen through reforms. But the expansion argument, I think with the growth in the existing Medicaid expenditures is going to be a really tough one for anybody to make.
So let's transition into a couple of things that have percolated. The first thing I want to talk about is veto session, which happened last week. The big ticket item was right to work, which would Joe, can you explain what right to work is again?
Okay, well, basically, right to work was the bill that would have barred unions and employers from requiring all workers in a bargaining unit to pay dues or fees.
Yes. So it didn't end up, it had a majority, but it did not get a veto-proof majority. You were one of the people, I believe, who voted to override the governor. What's kind of your take on the entire situation?
Well, I think that, I don't know that there were many people that expected us to have the votes to override that veto. I think that, in a veto session, the decision to try to override is one that, is really up to every sponsor. It's not something that, as far as I'm aware, has been micromanaged by anybody, in leadership. And so, a lot of the people in the caucus wanted to see this veto overridden. Obviously, there were 20 people in our caucus who did not want the veto to be overridden, and I think it just solidified the idea that it's more than likely going to require there to be a Republican governor, in order to make Missouri a right-to-work state. And we have an election in 2016, and I think that the outcome of that election is probably going to have an impact on whether or not Missouri becomes a right-to-work state. Now, that's not to say that some people may not term out, or other people may not run for re-election, et cetera. And I think all of a sudden if you get to from 96, I think if you get to 105, getting the last four is something that is a lot easier when you've got 105 or 106 people who are strongly in support of it. The people who are on the fence, may go ahead and vote to override the veto. So, I guess that's my take on it. It's disappointing that we didn't override the veto, but it wasn't unexpected.
Were there any other things during veto session in particular that you were either surprised by or were pleased to see happen?
I don't think my biggest concern going into veto session was going to be the ability of the Senate to function. Obviously, at the end of the year, last year, things got pretty bogged down over there, and I didn't know, if that was going to continue. And it seems that, that it did. Everything. Once the right to work vote occurred in the House, the gears started turning over in the Senate, and there was debate on the bills, but at the end of the day, they were able to get the bills that we all anticipated that were going to be overridden. They got those done, and I don't think there were really any surprises. Everything we wanted to do, we did. We knew that the school transfer bill, House Bill 42, we knew before we got there that wasn't going to be that wasn't going to go. So it would have been nice to get that dealt with. But I think the three bills that I was most interested in going into it were Senate Bill 224, which I was a handler of in the House. House Bill 150, which was the unemployment reform bill that the House overrode during session and the Senate overrode at veto session. And then lastly, it was I think it's House Bill 722, which was the bill with the minimum wage provision in it. So those were the three that I was focused on and hopeful would be overridden, and they all were. So that's where we ended up.
So the first bill that you mentioned, I believe dealt with the A+ scholarship program. Could you talk a little bit more about what that bill was trying to do and kind of the pushback that occurred from the governor and other people?
Yeah. So really, I think there are probably a lot of people who, if they're not familiar with the background on this, may not understand the motives or the intention behind that bill. Before this year, essentially what the bill did, I guess, is what I should probably start with, is it made it so that the A+ scholarship is available to citizens and permanent residents. Prior to that, you had to be lawfully present, but you also had to fill out the FAFSA, complete the FAFSA to draw down federal aid. And for all intents and purposes, that made it so that you had to basically either be a citizen or permanent resident to have access to the scholarship, because in order to be eligible to fill out the FAFSA at the federal level, you have to be a citizen or a permanent resident. So what happened was, obviously, the Obama administration created this program called Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which is basically a form of prosecutorial discretion for what a lot of people refer to as dreamers, or people who arrived here before their 16th birthday, and I think prior to 2007, were eligible for this deferred action program, and basically just meant that that the department was going to give them temporary lawful presence, which is different from lawful status. That doesn't give them a green card or a visa or anything like that, but they were going to basically, through executive action, give temporary lawful presence to these students. The Department of Higher Education said, well, the only thing that would block these students from having access to the A+ scholarship then is filling out the A+, or filling out the FAFSA. So the department promulgated a rule last year to eliminate the requirement of those students to fill out the FAFSA, and that when they eliminated that requirement, it would make them eligible for the A+ scholarship. My concern, and the concern of, I think we had 2 Democrats in the House and 1 in the Senate vote for the bill during session. And my concern was that, A, the news that they were going to promulgate this rule came only days after they announced that the funding that the legislature approved, which, by the way, was the amount of money the governor asked for the scholarship program, they announced that funding wasn't going to be adequate to meet the needs of the program as it was. So shortly after the department realizes that the program is underfunded, they then announced that they're going to expand it to additional people. B, any student who doesn't go to a A+ qualifying high school, whether that be a public school that doesn't qualify, and there's a certain set of criteria in the statute that they have to meet to qualify, or if they are homeschooled or private school or charter schooled, any of those students, even if they're citizens, are not eligible for the A+ scholarship. So I had a problem with expanding access to a scholarship program for people who weren't citizens and who, whether people agree with it or not, weren't here legally. I had a problem with expanding access to those people before we give access to the other citizens in the state who don't have access to it. So we filed that bill. The bill would have been completely unnecessary had the Department of Higher Education not changed the rule. And so really the bill just kept things as they are and prevented an executive branch agency from making a change without any input from anybody who was elected.
And that got overridden along with the several other bills as well. We want to talk about another issue that I think could become an issue that's larger next year, and that is the St. Louis football stadium. Basically, there is fear among many legislators that the Nixon administration is going to issue bonds for a new football stadium without a legislative vote or a popular vote. And what I believe you and many other people have said in letters is you will not support appropriating money to pay off those bonds unless it's either voted upon by the legislature beforehand or there's a popular vote for it. I just want to make sure, is that the correct summation of what you were saying before?
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment of my position. As it began to appear that the governor was I guess making it publicly known that he fully intended this is going to happen. We're gonna do this thing with or without the Rams. And it started becoming a more realistic action that seemed like he was strongly considering taking. That started raising red flags with not just myself. Obviously, Senator Schaaf, I believe, sent out the first letter on his side, and obviously Representative Barnes on the House side has been working on this issue for quite some time. I was kind of sitting back, assuming that that this thing was going to die under its own weight. But once it started to look more and more likely that the governor was going to push this forward, I felt a responsibility to make my position known, because as you're aware, the appropriations on the debt service do have to pass the budget committee, and so I just I wrote a letter and let the governor know that was my position, and that I did not support him unilaterally issuing debt for a new stadium, which isn't even a state-owned asset. In every other case where debt's been issued for a large project, look at the Fulton Hospital, for example, there's always been legislative approval prior to the issuance of the bonds, and so it was just a matter of, I didn't think we should be sitting on our hands and then later on say, well, we don't like the way you did this, we're not going to pay for it. I think we needed to be proactive, and since that has happened, there have been a lot of other legislators who've joined that coalition.
Now, is there concern about the impact of losing a football team and gaining one? I was around when all this was going on, something similar 25 years ago, after the football Cardinals left, and after a couple of years, the state got involved. Some legislators at the time, many of them thought that it turned out to be more important to have an NFL team than they thought. Is there any discussion, or thoughts among legislators from your neck of the woods about that impact, or is it considered this is a St. Louis problem and they're going to have to fix it themselves?
I think that, if you took a survey of all the legislators in the state and asked them, would you like to have a football team in St. Louis, the answer would be probably a unanimous yes. It's not an issue where we think that there shouldn't be a football team or don't want the Rams to stay, or I'm hopeful the Rams will stay. Obviously, they don't seem too interested in staying. But at the end of the day, it's much more an issue of process than it is. To me, the obligation of this amount of money of taxpayer funds they're not just St. Louis taxpayer funds. They're people who live on the Arkansas border, who live on the Iowa border up in northwest Missouri, that their tax dollars would go to support these appropriations. And I don't think that it defies history the way that the governor's attempting to do it, and I don't think that it should happen without there being at least a vote of the people who have to answer to their constituents when we appropriate this money, or the constituents themselves.
So I'm going to play, this is a politically speaking first, by the way. I'm going to play two clips back to back of the governor. The first one is from February 2015, where I asked him about legislation that had been filed by Ryan Silvey of Kansas City, a Republican state senator, that would have required either a legislative or statewide vote to issue bonds for a new stadium. This is what he had to say when I asked him that question.
Well, first of all, the legislature gets a vote on the bonds each and every year. The current bonds and all of the bonds of the state must go through and do go through the appropriations process and have to be approved. And in order to maintain our AAA standard and AAA rated bonds, they vote on those. That's part of the process. So they'll be involved in those in that decision making process.
So a little bit of time passed. The Silvey's bill didn't end up passing. There was an attempt to place language inside the budget that I don't think ended up passing in the Budget Conference Committee. But after the legislative session occurred, as you kind of alluded to, a number of legislators, including Senator Rob Schaaf and a few other senators and budget chairmen of both chambers, basically said what you just said, that they weren't going to support paying off bonds that weren't either approved by the legislature or a statewide vote. This is what the governor had to say in reaction to that situation of legislators raising alarm after the session.
Last year, the legislature talked about this a number of times and took off language that would have slowed down the process. The fact that in the interim, 4 or 5 or 6 folks start talking about it out of a legislature with 200 people, they're certainly entitled to say what they want, but it is not going to dramatically affect the continued progress we're making in a taxpayer-sensitive way to move forward.
So what the governor basically was saying there was there were attempts to try and restrict what he is maybe going to do with these bonds, and they basically ended up failing. His message to me signaled that it was like too little too late to try to stop this train from going forward. What's kind of your impression of his remarks, especially juxtaposed what he said earlier in February?
Well, I think that, one of the reasons that language may have not been in the budget, is if we decide that we have to start telling the governor the things he can't do with the money that we appropriate, I think that opens a pretty dangerous can of worms. Because, what else do we have to tell him he can't do? I think the purpose of an appropriation, you have to state, the Constitution says we have to state the specific amount and purpose of an appropriation. The appropriation for that Edward Jones Dome said exactly that. It's for a payment on the debt service for the Edward Jones Dome. Refinancing those bonds and using that appropriation to pay for debt service on anything other than the Edward Jones Dome, would be, in direct contradiction to what the appropriation said. So I disagree with the governor's assertion of the situation being that because there was no language in the budget that said he can't go do this, that he therefore we've given him our stamp of approval. That's obviously not the position I'm going to take. So I think when you listen to some time has passed since the governor made the second remarks, but obviously last week the Senate, there were 21 senators who signed a letter stating that they were going to not support the appropriation of money for that purpose. So you have almost a supermajority of state senators, and you're familiar enough with the process in the Senate that if you get 2 or 3 or 4 senators that are against something strong enough, that it's not going to happen, right? And when you have 21, which is more than half, obviously, just by simple math, it's not going to happen. But even if some of them change their mind, the opposition of that many senators is not going to go away, and it's not going to be something that can be overcome, in my opinion. And I think you'll see probably a similar percentage of House members in the coming weeks will probably join the ranks of people who have been publicly opposed to it in the legislature.
So my final question for you is, if Nixon does end up extending the bonds by himself and he comes to the legislature with a budget that asks the legislature to approve paying off the bonds, and it may not even be Governor Nixon, it could be Governor Coster or Governor Kinder or whatever, is it just not going to be even included in the final bill that comes out of the legislature, given that you and Senator Sylvie, who may end up being the next budget chairs, probably going to have a big say on that decision?
Well, I think the one thing that the governor did say that was accurate was that there are almost 200 people in the legislature. And even if a budget chair or an appropriations chairman by themselves are for or against something in a budget, it does not necessarily mean that if the 195 other people are on the opposite side of the issue, that it doesn't mean that the budget chair will win that argument. But I would say that given the discussions that I've had with other members, that if the governor, whether it be this one or another one, were to take the action that this governor has said he will take, and there are people out there who are unaware enough to actually buy the bonds, that it's going to be an unfortunate situation for those people, because I don't see us changing. I mean, when you have this many people, and especially the people that it is, I mean, you've got, like you said, you've got the budget and the Senate budget leaders and the House budget leaders, number one and number two on both sides, saying that they're not going to support the appropriations. It's going to be a major uphill climb. So I would say that it's very unlikely, almost certainly not going to, the budget will almost certainly not include any appropriation for that debt service, whether or not the governor issues the bonds.
The only other thing, I said that was the last question, but I do want to ask this. Would that have an impact on the state's credit rating if there's bonds issued and, the state doesn't end up paying them off?
That would obviously be up to the rating agencies. I think that, the decision that I would make in that case would be cognizant of the fact that there is the potential that it could have a negative impact on the state's credit rating. And that would be extremely unfortunate, but at the end of the day, ensuring that the process remains, true and the way it should be is, I think, more important to me than losing one of the A's off of our credit rating. So I hope it doesn't come to that, but if it does, that it's the situation we might find ourselves in.
And this may be all a big philosophical exercise, because if Stan Kroenke wants to move his team to L.A. and the owners approve it, I don't think there's going to be a new stadium, and I think we're just kind of talking in philosophical realms here anyways. But we're completely out of time. We appreciate you joining us for this show. For all of our stories, stlpublicradio.org. I'm on Twitter at @JRosenbaum. Joe is on Twitter at
JMannies. That's JMannies.
And how can we follow you on Twitter, Representative?
It's at Fitzpatrick Mo, FITZPATRICKMO.
It is a longer handle than usual, but is entertaining as always.
There you go.
Until next week, so long.
If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.